Good enough. So we talked about counting the rise compared to the run on Friday. And so I just want you to watch. We're going to do a little demonstration here, thinking about what this example means. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch it off to the side. So by a sketch, I mean it's not going to be accurate. There's no scale or anything like that, but it's just to help me visualize. One of the main reasons why we graph is when we can visualize things, it helps us solve problems. It helps us think about it in the right way, think about it in a different way, figure out what's going on, make sure we don't make any mistakes. So let's take a look at this. So I'm going to go over 3, because this is 3, 2. So I'll go over 3 and up 2, put a point, and I'm going to go over 8 and up 11. So I can visualize those 2 points, and what we're going to do is we're going to count the slope, the rise and the run between those 2 points. But I can't count because I don't have squares, I don't have a grid, I don't have any of that. But what I do know is I do have these values. So this is a 3, and this is an 8, and this is a 2, and this is an 11. So if I want to count the rise, what is it? Ashley? 9. How'd you get that? 11 minus 2. Awesome. What's the run? 5. Same thing, right? 8 minus 3. And that's all this equation is find the rise by subtracting the y values and find the run by subtracting the x's, right? That's all that formula, which I hope you've seen that formula before. That's all that formula is, okay? Notice, though, that I went from this point to that point in both cases. So I started with this one, and I went up to that one, and then I started with the 3, right? I started with the same point every time. That is important. So we're going to talk about that again in a minute. So let's do this the formal way. I write down the equation y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And so I did 11 minus 2 over 8 minus 3, which is 9 over 5. Okay, so you can get that copied down. When you look at it, is it a positive slope or a negative slope? How do you know, Corbin? Yeah, because it's going that direction, right? Up to the right or whatever, however you want to think about it. It looks like a positive slope, and that worked out. So again, just watch for a minute. What if I made a mistake and I did this? 11 minus 2 over 3 minus 8. Yeah, that's going to give me a negative slope. So I'm going to get 11 minus 2, which is 9, over negative 5, which is the same as negative 9 over 5. But that's wrong. It's not a negative slope. Like, look at those 2 points. So what did I do wrong? Well, I mixed up. See how that's a point, 2 and 3? So something that's really important whenever you're doing this, and I'm going to give you a strategy in one of the other examples, if you tend to make those kinds of mistakes, is to make sure, you got to make sure of a whole bunch of things. You got to make sure that a point is on the same side, either the left or the right. So 8 and 11, 8 and 11. Okay? 3 and 2, 3 and 2. That's one thing you have to make sure of. Another thing you have to make sure of is the y's are on top, the x's are on bottom. Some people are going to say, oh, this is so easy. All I'm doing is subtracting. I can do this. This is easy stuff. But then they put the x's on top. Like, it might be easy, but it's also really picky. It's really specific. You have to do it exactly the right way. If you make any little mistake, you get totally the wrong answer. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're practicing this stuff. Any questions about that? All right, so this one is right, positive 9 over 5. We didn't need to reduce in that case or anything like that. It's already reduced. Let's try the next one. So you can keep writing this down. y2 minus y1. Or if you did it on Friday, a lot of you did, then you check your answers, make sure they're actually correct. And you didn't make any of those mistakes. It's easy to make those mistakes. It's the whole point. So it doesn't matter which point we start with. You can start with this point or you can start with that point, but you just have to be consistent. So if I think of like the y2 means the second point, right? So So if I think of the second point, I want the y value of the second point, which is 11, minus the y value of the first point, which is 7. That's the rise. We started with the rise. The change in the y's is the rise. Over, I started with 11, so I have to start with negative 6. If you make these mistakes even once, you can have that little conversation with yourself while you're doing it. I started with this point on top, so I start with this point on the bottom. Right? You practice a little bit, get in the habit, and then you got it. And then when I subtract negative 4, I'll put that in brackets because I have two negatives, makes it a little bit clearer. Already got that? So what does this work out to? 11 minus 7 is just 4. And then negative 6 minus negative 4 is plus 4. So this works out to 4 over negative 2. Now, when you're looking at a fraction, it doesn't matter where the negative is. What is 4 over 2? Not quite. 4 divided by 2, not 2 divided by 4. You're on the right track. So what's 4 divided by 2, Ryan? What's 4 divided by 2? Well, kind of, but. Yeah, what is 4 divided by 2? Thank you, 2. I know, it's an easy question. So the answer is negative 2, right? The negative being on the bottom just means the whole fraction is negative. It doesn't mean the actual bottom is negative. And for important reasons, they're not really as important today, but later on, in math, we never leave negatives on the bottom. It could really confuse things if we're doing other stuff later. So we either put the negative all the way out front or we put it on top. So just for example, this is a different question, but let's say I got 5 over negative 3. I wouldn't leave my answer like that. I'd write negative 5 over 3, or actually let me use 2 instead. Or I would do negative 5 over 2. And what is 5 divided by 2? It's 2.5, right? This is just the number negative 2.5. That's what that fraction is. So it's not that the 2 is negative. The whole thing is negative, right? Makes sense. So that's how we would write it one of those two ways, or in this case, you could write it that way. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay, quick visualization of this one. Let's see. So I go negative 4 up 7 and then negative 6 up 11. And it sure looks like that's going to be a negative slope. And it did work out that way, right? It was a negative slope. And again, I can think about the numbers and sort of counting the rise and the run, but we already did the math, so we're good. We got that okay? Okay, one more example. I'm going to give you one more little strategy. This is like the never fail strategy. So if you have any issues subbing in, because there's 4 things you sub in, it's really easy to get them backwards. Like I can't tell you how easy it is. There were so many people in the class right before this that were right on the ball, getting all of this, and then when they start practicing themselves, we're flipping numbers, right? It just happens because your brain starts wandering. So we're going to do this. Okay? And just watch for a second. This is y2, y1, x2, x1, right? Y's on top, x is on bottom. Somebody pick a point, the first point or the second point. Anybody? So 0, negative 5, like by the point, I mean the point. So that, okay, good. So the x goes on bottom and the y goes on top. And then I go to the other point. The x goes on bottom and the y goes on top. See how I did that? I'm just going to change the color. So 0, negative 5. 0, negative 5 was red, negative 3, 6. And now I'm sure I got the y's on top. I'm sure I got 1 point on one side and 1 point on the other side. Again, see what I mean by that? This is a point, and this is the other point. I didn't crisscross them or anything like that. Okay? And now I can just start simplifying. So this is negative 5 minus negative 6, which is plus 6. And 0 minus negative 3, which is 0 plus 3, which is 1 over 3. Quick sketch. 0, -5, and -3, -6. Looks like it should be positive, so it works out. What if, so Corbin told me to use 0, -5 as the first point. Okay, you don't have to write this down. You make sure you have those 3 copied down, but you don't have to write this. I'm going to do the last one more time. What if we started with the other point? So what if I started with -6 and -3 and -5 and 0? So that's going to be -6 plus 5 over -3 minus 0, which is -1 over -3, and 2 negatives makes a positive. So they're both positive, they're both gone. Same answer. See, so it doesn't matter which point you start with, but you have to have the point above itself. If you crisscross, then your sign will be wrong. As long as you, it doesn't matter which point you start with, but as long as you're consistent, it'll work out. If you know how to use negatives and that kind of thing. What do you think?